So I finished Hatsuyuki Sakura and I was kind of conflicted on it. It's made by Saga Planets, who made Sparking Youth. It came out a few months ago and with Kinkoi like a while back. Kinkoi still has the overall larger impact spike, and Sparking Youth has like a more consistent feel to it. This one tries to be more upfront, and then they're like, oh, the routes are just there to piecemeal you info for the last route. And honestly, outside of maybe the first two routes, it does kind of a bad job out of it. And one of them is pretty much just a continuation of the prologue slash like common route, and that's solely because each new piece of good info is like maybe 10 minutes long. It's like, what the fuck? You made a whole route out of this just for this info? It's like, alright, I guess. So before going through the plot, don't look through the CG gallery until you're done with it. It's not a serious spoiler because obviously this character would be the focal point of the VN. It's like, alright, I understand. But having CG from around like the end game right at the start is pretty fucking funny. I'd say the best part of the VN is probably like the main character, Kawano Hatsuyuki. I'll just be calling him Kawano, it's easier. He's a Dai Kaito from Goei. Basically, he's an asshole that shit talks like 90% of the time. It's technically part of the plot, but what he pushes out gets to be like repetitive after a while. You can still get a laugh out of it like 10 hours in, but you can see like, hey, his vocabulary is pretty minimal at times. It's to the point that even Sakura, the dumbass, points it out and becomes like kind of a running joke in itself. And the thing is, you can't really just describe Sakura as a dumbass because the majority of these characters in these titles are just fucking dumbasses. It's like calling that if it had like, oh, had Tomoyo, I was like, oh, that's fine, and then like 7 Fukos. And I guess a better example would be like, oh, if you read Snow, and then every character's behaving like Sumino, it's like, holy shit, this is awful. And hey, it's like, you know, I like Fuko, I like a route, it's actually one of my favorite ones in there. It's just hard to understand why you go with that many, even if you're trying to go like into a more like comedic entry. Like, you still have a plot here, why so many of these dumbasses, holy shit. I get when it's like a one-on-one type of thing, it's just like a double act. And I think it's like the bokeh or whatever, I don't know. Yeah, but when it's all of them, it kind of gets old after a few routes. So, you know, let's go through the characters. There's Kawano, basically the delinquent. He was already not in the greatest shape, but it went downhill pretty fast after what happened to him before the title happened. He curses almost in every line, and his vocabulary is pretty minimal, and most of his stuff is more like retorts than actually trying to continue the conversation. Technically kind of a dumbass, but it's mostly like immaturity, and it's like he's socially inept, but he knows what to do if it's required of him. It's like, alright, like if you give him a task to do, he knows how to do it. He can do it pretty well. You just don't talk to him. Then there's Sakura. She has a strong nose and loves doing like bunny jokes. Her character is basically something that was done in chapter 4 of Yumineko, while, you know, it worked really well in Yumineko. Here it's just a more understandable, like, oh, that makes sense why it's like this, but it's not like, oh, I am dying, my heart broke, I am crying. It's like, no, it's like, oh, I understand. I think this is more of like a title I had to read at the right time, like how Kirikiri is special to me, even though it's technically like a 7 or even a little bit lower. For me, it's like, oh, I put it like a 9 or a 10. It's just not in my actual overall like tier list or anything. It was like, it's not, you know, it's not a freaking 10, but for me personally, it's like, yeah, I love this one. And I think this one's like the same thing. It was like, hey, depending on what you read or what you didn't read at this point, it's like, hey, actually this resonated with me a lot, and this is why I like it a lot. But overall, if you only go in more objective things, like, a lot of it's kind of annoying. Then it's Aya. She's the best character in the title. I like her route the most, but I'll get to that later. Basically, she's like the Tomio slash like Meiko of the VN, and her reverses the roles. And Kawano's usually like the one being an angry and asshole and like cornering people, but in this case with Aya, he's the one getting cornered or at least getting sidestepped. And a lot of that gets explained in her route and later on in the finale as well. But she, you know, she already graduated, she's not in the school thing. A lot of times you don't even see her. Her screen time is actually kind of minimal until her route happens. And you know, it's like, you have the little cafe that he works on and she works there too, and that's about it. I think you need to do Ai or Azuma first, and the others are locked until you finish those. But Azuma is like about figure skating, and I don't know why, but I always have like a soft spot for it. I think I've read like 3 VNs or something with it, and all of them are like, actually, this is great. And I don't think I've ever talked to someone that actually like Kanan's or from Jisenjo, which is one of the examples, right? She's kind of more normal than the rest until like Kawano is around and she becomes yet another mess. Basically, she can't handle him and is teasing or like all around harassment later on, and you know, acts more like a toddler when he's around, but otherwise she's fine. I think at this point, outside of like side characters, there's only like Shirokuma and Nozomu left, and yeah, some of the side characters are pretty alright. There's some that are actually really dumb as well. But they're side characters, so it'd be great if they had like something going on for them, but it's also like nothing I'd complain about. It's like, yeah, they're just side characters. Outside of them maybe having like repeating sets of jokes, but that's already happening with Kawano anyway, and you know, it's like, what can you do? Anyways, Shirokuma was a useless character. Anything she has in her route or even her character, everything that matters is stuff that's happening around her. She herself could be kicked out, and I'll just talk about that later. Like, she doesn't have to be there. She's the largest airhead, and like a quarter of her lines are just her making like random sounds that she gets bullied into saying because Kawano's like, do a fucking bear, do a salmon. It's like, why? Why are you here? Nozomu's just kind of a weirdo. She's pretty gullible and gets scared kind of easy at times. She admires like Kawano's bravado and wants to be like, hey, we're gonna be bros. So because she's pretty wimpy and she tries to like swap like to bro speak, and it's like that's like her running joke. It's like, hey dude, hey bro, and Kawano's like, what the fuck? It's like, nah man, we're like friends now. We're gonna be cool. But she's still the wimpy character, and it happens a lot. And it's like, yeah, she's really dumb, but she's also really straightforward enough and wants to finish the shit that's been given to her. It's like, hey, you want me to do this task? I'm gonna do it the best I can. Hey guys, let's all group and do this shit. It's like, alright, cool. You're like the team leader. It's alright. Two of the side characters have some scenes when you finish Nozomu's route, but there's nothing to them. It's like 3 scenes of like slice of life each. And I guess like the small info here and there transfers over to like the true route. It's like, alright, it kind of makes sense. It's not really horrible, but still kind of weird considering it's like, hey, no one really told you these routes or these like little sections are actually in here, because by the time you finish the last route, you can just go right into the true route and you can't access from there. You have to go back into like the other place. I think it's just like start or whatever, and then you can find it there. And it's like, why would people go back here unless they want to like reread something? There's also one where it's like, hey, it's just Kuwano eating by himself like 3 times, and that one was actually pretty funny for some reason. It was kind of dumb, and I don't know why it's there, but it's like, alright, it's fine, I guess. So basically, if I had to do ranking of these characters, it'd be like Aya at the top, and then technically there's like another one, but they're only in 1 chapter and the spoilers, so I'm not going out like through it. And then there's Kawano at like 2 steps down, and then Nozomu and like Azuma at C, and then Sakura's at like D+. It has moments where she's like, actually she's really great, she could be a B, but otherwise like, there's your D+. And then Shirokuma gets like punted to like F-. Like she could be disappeared, like, she's so useless. You'd probably not notice the running gags and how moronic they are if the title's like around 10 or 15 hours. The thing is, the title's totally doable under that time. It basically drift feeds info at the end of each route, and it's like always like 10 or 15 minutes long, except for one where it was a lot. It was like 2 or 3 hours. But even then, that could be in the common route, because in that one it was more specific, like, hey, here's like the target, or that like the target of like anger, or it's not really an antagonist, but it kind of is in a way. It's antagonist for Kawano, but in the overall story it's not. But the whole point is like, it's a target that he can go for. And this was like, well, we can't just drop him right the last like 3 hours of the V, and it would be stupid, so they do it here. But really, they could have put this in like in the beginning of the second common story or something. It's like, it would make sense, it'll be fine. And I'll be going over a good chunk of that in like the spoiler section, because overall it's like, it's not really important here. So the point of the title's in the name. Like, so like, Sparking Youth was self-explanatory, right? Sparking Youth. Kinkoi had Experience Your Golden Time, which for some reason Golden Time wasn't in the title, but it's in the fan disc. But still, you know, it's in like the first 20 minutes of the plot or whatever. It's like Golden Time. Alright, I understand that, cool. This one is Winter Crossing the Spring, and I think it's specifically called like, it's like the first snow to spring or something like that. But it's basically like, hey, handle and clear negative feelings that walk into a new beginning. It's all about like, oh, I'm stuck in my hole, I'm getting the help that I need to start moving again, or keep the hole going and just rot in there. So like, yeah, it's a classic despair / like dread to hope type of plot. It's not trying to hide it. I'm pretty sure at some point outright just tells you what's about, and it's somehow great because Kawano finally like starts talking like a normal person. It's also in the description when you start by it. Though I'm not really a fan of that, it kind of spoils part of the fun of that, and that's also why I rarely read those things. So a lot of things were apparent sometimes, like, oh, that was surprising, because guess what, I didn't read it. Like, I know I'm not going to name any titles because of that, but a lot of titles that I've read, I think would be diminished if I actually read the descriptions half the time. Anyways, it handles the point well, but also didn't really need all those routes to handle it. I guess it tried hammering it home like it did with the jokes. Though I guess the idea of each route is just like portraying different degrees of what Kawano's going through or how he ends up with. Like, alright, it makes sense. I understand why he did it that way, outside of like marketing purposes. Like, hey, look at all these routes we have. Look at all these H-scenes we can put in. And it's like, it could be shortened. But it's, you know, it's always a conflicting thing, is like, what should we do? Because, you know, what gets more sales? And obviously it's the more routes. So before I get to what I feel about it overall, I just want to talk about the music. But really, it's about the track Freak of Nature. This track's amazing. What's better is it hits like my nostalgia from some Euro tracks from back in the 90s. This title has 3 LPs. One of them is Freak of Nature, though I'm not sure if it gets counted as one. It's more like a slideshow of the characters. Think of it like when you beat Donkey Kong, right? Donkey Kong Country, and it shows all the enemies sliding with their names. It just looks like that. It's also used in most of the climactic like scenes in each route. It's like, hey, that's great. You know, some people are like, oh, are you overusing the song? I'm like, hey man, I love this song. I don't care. And I think the second OP was from Fripside, and the third one was from Kodoko. I probably butchered their names, or the band names, right? This really just seems like 2000s flexing a little more, and I'm expecting like Yui Itsuki to show up out of nowhere. It's like, hey, I'm also doing one track. It's like, what the how are you here? The ending songs are fine. I think Kazahana is a lot better standalone track, but the last one hits the mood of it. It's like, hey, once you finish the VN, once you're done, you know, you listen to something like a year later, you're not going to be listening to the other one, you'll be listening to Kazahana. And I think like the only normal track I'd remember is like Parade. That's not the actual name of it, there's more to it, but it's also spoilers. So, well, spoilers up to like the prologue. Once you finish the prologue, you understand, right? But it's amazing, and it transitions through all these moods, and it feels like a grudge match with all these other composers in the fucking title. It's like, fuck you and your vocals, fuck your OP, look at all this orchestra I'm pushing in here, fuck you, I'm the best. And it's like, hell yeah, this is great. Anyways, overall, this is a weird one to talk about because almost anything about the plot is spoilers. Sure, I can talk about the prologue, except almost all of that is comedy and showing how people react to Kawano. So a lot of stuff will be in the spoilers. What I can say is that the title isn't all that concise. A lot of times you can go through like a whole route and get like the smallest nugget of new info. Routes not giving much is fine for like sparking youth because it's about more like having a good time and the vibe of like about the youth shit. It's like, alright, it makes sense. But in this one, you can tell they're trying to centralize like a narrative and build off each new piece, but it takes so damn long because you have to go through the next route every fucking for like a next extra 15 minutes. Like, holy shit, why? Like, there's one where the route itself is useless and all the new info's in the epilogue, and it was so much better than the route. Holy shit, it was so much better. I think it was almost like the same length of the route too. I think I said this before, but this one is one of those titles that you have to read at the right time to fully appreciate it. I think the running gags end up hurting the overall experience as it wears you down, but a lot of the routes, or at least the relevant parts of the plot, are like foils or mirrors or just slapping Kawano saying like, hey, this is you, loser. Look at me. I'm like you, I have the same problems, but look, I'm not bitching about it. Though technically they are just not doing as much. Like, hey, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing what you're trying to do to fix it, you know, I'm just doing it normally. It's someone like Yurusukai where it uses pieces of everything else to make it like a better finale, but it's not the same level like at all. Like the first half of the finale was basically like a new common route. It makes sense with what they're trying to do, but at this point it's like, holy shit, you could have just integrated a lot of this into this common route and not have all these routes. It's one of those where you can either complain that there should be more routes or that it should be better without them, but in this case I never really see myself asking like, hey, this should be a Shirokuma route. It's like, no, fuck her. So I'm giving it a 7, but I understand people putting like into an 8. The finale just didn't do enough to bump it up. Even if though I liked it and I know what it was trying to do and it even did it rather well, it just, I've seen it done better. Maybe it's more about like, I already seen this a few times. I already seen this done better. Maybe I'd have it higher on like a more subjective sense if I read this earlier. If it was shortened down, I can see this as a 9. It removed some of the humor fatigue that I had, and there wouldn't be a mediocre route for me to shit on all the time. In the end, this one has a better common route and a better main character, but just gets bogged down by having too many routes that try to link back to the premise, and I'm pretty sure this was similar to my complaint on Kinkoi, a title that would be amazing if it cut out like 3 routes from it. Personally, I still like Sparking Youth better, but I can see what they're going for and it did well enough, and I can see why. Like, actually, this is the best title from Saga Planets, or this is my favorite one. I understand why you'd go for that. So for the spoilers, I'll be going over a bit of the plot. You start out with what they call the prologue. It's just a common route, and it might just not be called that because there's already like another common route later on, except that's also not called the common route. I think it's called like White Graduation, it's like the finale, but before the finale happens, there's basically a common route in there. Anyways, the prologue handles like the first section of each route. It's like, oh, this is what this character's about. Oh, she has ice skating or figure skating. Oh, this is her problem. This is what happens. Like, all right, I understand what's happening. That's not like Shirokuma where all she does is like, hey, I'm here. I got told to work in your cafe. Okay, hi. And it's like, what the fuck you doing here? This is when the humor's still fresh, and if you're a fan of like the constant shit talking, then you'll have fun. Once the prologue is done, you get to see the Freakin' Nature OP, and you know, like I said before, it's my favorite track. During this time, a couple of new characters show up. It ends up being that like, oh, Ran was already killed. Ran's like a character that's not really important. It's important for Kawano, but for the overall plot, it's not very important. She got killed, and that Kawano lives in this like haunted hotel, and that he's like, oh, he's the ghost child. And I'm making this a lot lamer than what it is, but you know, it's how it is. It's what you get. The ghost child is what Sakura was looking for. And then you hit the first route, except it's not really one. If you read the Little Busters, consider like Sakura one, but not exactly. It's actually done a little bit worse. Basically, it's like a bad ending where, hey, Kwano's going for revenge and nothing's stopping him. I don't think they were really trying to hide the ghost child aspect, but the steps it took was still well done. It still tries to be like, holy shit, this was amazing, and you know, it has the right track for it, it makes it work. And then you finally start your first route, Aya. I'm pretty sure you can start Azama too, but I don't think it flows that well considering there's tiny parts in Azama that only kind of make sense with the context from Aya. Like he brings out a sword as he mentions like, oh, you know, I've been renting this, except, you know, she never said the time limit of it, so I'm still keeping it. And that's only a thing if you did Aya, so like, I don't know if that part is just removed if you don't do Aya first, I'm not sure. Anyways, Aya's the best route outside of the finale, and even tries to compete with it. It's basically that second female lead in anime where it makes you think, it's like, holy shit, is she gonna like end up with the guy in the end? And sometimes that's actually the case. It's not the case in this one. I mentioned it before, and it's like, oh, there's actually a second favorite character I have, and I kept it in the spoilers, like, oh, let's talk about it here, and it's like, oh, it's Ai's brother, Akira. Akira's fucking dead, and half of the route is Kawano missing that point, and he's just thinking he's alive and just being an asshole about it. And, you know, Akira's an asshole, he's kind of demented, he's kind of fucked up sometimes. But basically, people keep, like, getting cut off before they tell Kawano that Akira's dead, so he still thinks he's alive for, like, 3/4 of the time. The route is in the past, and it shows what Kwon was doing between like the period where Ren died and him being kicked out of the hotel, and he was just homeless. So he's doing some shady shit alongside just beating the shit out of these people that enter like what he considers his turf. You can consider him like Yusuke from Yu Yu Hakusho, except Yusuke's a lot nicer. Anyways, he comes across Akira and he takes like jobs from him. He gets paid up front. Akira goes nuts sometimes, and it's great when that happens. The route also covers some of the side characters, and it's like the start of Sai being interesting. He was like the previous student council president. He's like Nozomu's brother. And yeah, he's also kind of a nutcase, but it's like things have to trigger it for it to happen. He's basically like a step down compared to Kawano. Their reasoning and what happened to them, you know, it's different, but in the end, they're both stuck in their own holes, and they'll go to like some drastic measures to get what they want. It's like, holy shit. A lot of these people or these characters are basically just representations of them, or representations of Kawano. Anyways, he's important later on, but he's not like a focal point, but I think he's important. The gist of Ai's route is like, oh, you can get possessed with the help of like some incense and some natural affinity, and Akira was possessing Aya and she was fine with it. So it ends up with Kawano severing the tie, which also incinerates like all her memories of that winter. So she no longer knows Kawano, and much less that they were going out. She still feels like influenced to work at the cafe, so they're still talking, they're still there, but Kawano's always kind of off when she's around, and that's completely normal and shows why he's always like on the losing side when she's around. Because like, yeah, in his mind, it's like, oh, she's still special to him, you know, it works fine. But for her, it's like, oh, it's, you know, this guy's pretty funny. Azama kind of covers the spirit instance thing that was already in Aya's route. It's a cute route and I liked it a lot, but also it's not really necessary from what I remember. Basically, it's just another character to reflect what like Kwano was going through to a different degree. Like, we becoming Naruto up in here. Holy shit. I guess it's like the same kind of idea as Aya, because like, well, they're both first routes. So it's like, hey, if you missed one, hey, here's this, and it still explains this again. But otherwise, like, yeah, why is it here? I don't know. It also reminds me of a different VN, which again is Yumi Neko, which was like chapter 3? I think it was chapter 3. Shirokuma doesn't really have a route. She's got nothing to do. She's been studying for school but didn't go through the process at all. And decides like, hey, I'm gonna enroll to like where Kawano is. Fails and then tries it again, and that's like her whole route. She herself is useless. It's about who she's related to. Basically, in every ending, Kawano tries to kill off her grandpa or dad. I forgot. It's because his role and him as a character is useless. It's mostly what he represents. Like, oh, he's the target for Kawano's about. All right, anything else, it could be the mom. It didn't matter at all. Her epilogue is either close to the length of her route or even longer. Basically, this is the real route, and it's not really about her, it's to drag her relative's ass into the haunted hotel. Sure, Kawano has to change of heart by the end, showing that, like, hey, actually he can go through his problems, but it was just too late this time around. It does show a little bit of how, like, Kawano loses his mind, and this gets covered in the true route, so it's also kind of whatever. Like, even that, where it's like, hey, I can explain why this is important, why this route had to exist. Like, actually, no. This route is more to solidify what Kwano's trying to do in the other couple of routes. And so it's like, oh, we can't just drop random characters in the finale and it makes no sense. But really, they could have just revealed his ass in passing, like somewhere in the beginning of the common route story too or whatever. It's like, it would have worked fine. And I think they did, but not in the way of like revealing anything. It was like, oh, you got the princess, don't mess with her. And she's talking about Shirokuma, which was the thing you already knew from her route. But otherwise, like, hey, add like another 10 lines in there and it would work. Nozomu is kind of the same deal, where a good chunk of it is just to show Kawano a way out alongside elaborating on what Sai is about. I should be around like as harsh on this route as it was with Shirokuma, but this one has like a natural progression for Sai and where it starts in Maya and then it ends in the finale, though technically most of it is in this route, but he still has a progression to the finale. It makes sense. It's also here to show like, oh, Nozomu's randomly good at kendo, like as much as her brother, and I might have just not paid attention about it. It was just kind of random, just showed up. This is also kind of important for the true route, but also it's like, it was so random here. It could be random the finale, who knows. I guess technically this also covers a bit of like the only teacher you see in the title, but in the end, she didn't really do much. Honestly, I thought she would have like a heavier emphasis on the plot. Maybe I just missed it. I assume it's more of what was already going on, that everybody had their own issues they're going through, and it's like, hey, Kawano, you're not all that special. And that's why like most of them like having Sakura around. And that's basically it. I'm not going to cover the finale. I don't think I can ever do it justice on what it goes. It's more of a vibe check. You have to be there. You have to read through it. And you're like, actually, this was great. The first half is basically like another common route, to the point that this could have been like a continuation of the prologue. And I think it could have probably just worked like that without the, you just have to somehow add Ai's route in there. So it would be the split in between. There's a side character called Kubo that has like his own gag where he just wants Kawano's approval. He wants to be like rivals, but he's like a little bitch. Except it never really went anywhere, to the point that his friend, who was even like a smaller side character, got more screen time by the end, right? It's like, oh, why? It's to the point that I thought it was like, oh, eventually they're going to show like, actually, this is not a dude. This is, this is a girl that likes him because like, oh, he protected his ass. And it's the one who's like Otome Domains or whatever it was called. It's like, hey, it's actually a dude that's pretending to be a girl. And this one's like, hey, it's actually a girl pretending to be a dude for some reason. It's like some societal crap. I think he's like an important family. It's like, no, you got to be a dude. And I thought it'd be that, but nothing really happens. Basically, you just don't get much of it. Unless I missed something, which is, super possible. And that's pretty much it for this one. I might push some more stuff out in these like next 2 months, since I was already working on some other stuff. There's that Ubisoft title that came out. It might actually already be out by the time this video is out. I'm actually not sure. I've been doing the stupid like yearly VN release thing. I've also read Dead Days, and I'm writing about that, and then I'll make the video, and then I'll rewrite what I did for the video, and then my process is very stupid. But that's pretty much it.